So I've taken up enough of your time. So without further ado to the main event, I'm going to pass it to Betsy.
Hello. So Maddie, how did this book come into being?
That's a great question, Betsy. It was sort of accidental, to be perfectly honest. I wrote the first essay I wrote was one about making a coat. I made the coat after the end of a long-term relationship. I think I was just at a loose end. It was during COVID. I didn't really know what to do with myself, and I felt like it would be good to keep busy and to make something kind of complicated. So I made a coat, and then after I'd made the coat, I sort of felt like I wanted to write about it, which surprised me. I don't think I'd ever written about something I'd made up to this point. It felt like sewing was a completely different discipline in my life from writing. So this was the first time they'd kind of overlapped. But I wrote that essay and published it on my Substack, and I had some really nice feedback. And so I sort of thought maybe there are some more garments I could write about. So it grew from there.
Cool. So it was published by the Emma Press.
Yes, that's right. It's a
Correct.
little UK independent press.
And then in Tin House, which
And then some
is
house,
the
yeah. Yeah.
cool. So what made you start writing about sewing?
Um, well, I guess I'm a creative nonfiction writer mostly, and so eventually you write about everything that happens to you, in a way. So I had been doing a lot of sewing. I kind of couldn't figure out what it was about it that drew me to it. I don't know why I initially started sewing. I think initially it was just something to do, and then I sort of wondered why I was so drawn to it. And so writing was a way of exploring that. I feel like you, Betsy, are also the author of two wonderful craft related books. And I suppose books that are specifically about craft and storytelling. So Knitting for Good and Craftivism. I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about what you think the connection is between craft and writing.
I think one feeds the other, right? Like when I started writing, I wrote poetry in college, and then I thought maybe I would be a journalist. And then I had this teacher that I really disliked who said that maybe should get into like analytic writing or, writing about stuff that wasn't creative fiction or, wasn't fiction. And I was like, this is, I had explored all these different types and it sounded kind of boring to write
Mhm.
that kind of work. And then when I started making, it was such an internal process that there was so much going on in my head that I was connecting to history, I was connecting to family, I was connecting to myself, I was connecting to all these things, right? And making all these choices, the choices that you make when you create, that they just started coming together. I was like, I can feel, right? About like I have feeling about sewing and I want to share it in that way and making. And that kind of opened this portal to a whole world that was really exciting. And I think that we all see the world like through different lenses, right? So for me, it's through making, whereas for someone else, it may be running or cooking or gardening. And it's really great to find that kind of vein. There was someone in the chat that mentioned a parenting memoir, right? And that's exciting too. Like you find these things and you're like, I need to write about them. So, so yeah.
I kind of
So
feel like
yeah,
oh, sorry, Betsy. I was going to say
yeah,
as
okay.
kind of like whatever you I think you come across things in your life that kind of make you think about everything else in your life a little bit differently. Like they put a different lens on everything. And often that's an activity of some kind, but also sometimes it can just be an experience. But I feel like maybe for both you and I, the act of crafting or of making things with our hands or working with textiles is a way of, is that lens of looking at everything else.
Yeah, and it's also time to think as well. You're not on your phone. You're not having a conversation. Well, sometimes you're having a conversation, but there's a lot of time to just sit with your thoughts, which is unique here in
Yep.
2025 because we don't often have a lot of time to just sit. And so I think that whereas in previous iterations of of time, I would think about dialogue or think about a line of poetry, I would sit with what I was making and then it turned into how is this connected to everything around me? Which,
Mm.
you know, and then
It's really
so you have,
beautiful.
yeah, so you have 17 items that you write about in
Yeah.
your book. Why 17?
Honestly, 17 is completely random. I think I was mostly concerned with the shape of the book and wanting there to be a sense of progression, or yeah, I don't know, from sort of, I wanted it to be a gesture of opening. And so I knew there were all these different parts of the sewing world I wanted to write about. So, for example, kind of the Instagram inspiration side of it, the environmental impact of clothes making, how it feels to be in a body. There were all these kind of things that I felt like sewing touched on. So I knew I wanted to
Yeah.
cover all of those within the garments. And it just sort of ended up being 17 things. But yeah, it was more about sort of arranging them in the right order.
And then when you got to 17, we were like, that's enough, you know, like,
I think initially I actually got to 16, and then the initial publisher, the Emma Press, was like, "Do you think you have one more?" So somehow that just worked out that way. But
which
yeah, it's
one
pretty
was the
random.
17th?
The last one.
The last,
Yeah,
the quilt.
yeah.
Have you finished the quilt?
I did finish the quilt, but I don't think it's very beautiful, so it's never going to be photographed. But I had a lot of fun making it, and I think it's found a good home. I've given it to a friend.
Oh, good. Well,
Yeah,
I'm sure it's wonderful.
it's very generous.
So
Mm.
in your book, you talk about how making is an act of life, of love, of family. And did sewing bring all those things to the forefront, or were they already there in other acts of creativity besides making and writing?
Well, I suppose I think life, love, and family are things that concern everybody to some extent. Hopefully, to a great extent. It's the kind of like central human experience that you kind of do have to engage with if your life is to be meaningful. But yeah, I think sewing provided a really interesting and kind of explicit way of thinking about all those questions at the same time. I think when I came to it, I was asking a lot of questions about what it meant to be female and mixed heritage and Asian, and I suppose also what it meant to love somebody, what it meant to be single after the end of a long relationship. Um, and I think sewing just kind of gave me a way of looking at all those questions at the same time, and also to touch on sort of broader social things. So like, um, I think sewing really has kind of refined my sense of what my aesthetic taste is and what my relationship is with my body. What I kind of feel like how I might live more lightly in terms of a climate impact perspective. All of these things just felt like they were touched on by sewing, and so I think sewing did bring it all to the forefront, even though those elements were all present already. Yeah,
Yeah, because we wear
yeah,
clothes, right? So it's like then there's so much
yeah,
history involved in
yeah.
garments themselves, like where they came from and um where when they were created and in what part of the world they were created initially, right? The initial garment that you're wearing, like this, like when was the first time someone made a cardigan? You have that history. And then you have who made the cardigan and what is
Yeah.
it made of and what color is it and whatever. And there's so many choices that you can really go down the
Sure.
rabbit hole. I mean, did you ever feel really emo like writing about like making, because it's such an internal process? That is a personal question, but I'm like, I feel like I'm in my head a lot with writing,
Yes,
and I just
absolutely.
wonder how other people feel.
Absolutely. I think that in some ways I feel like writing and sewing are complementary but completely different disciplines, because writing sort of, it invites you to look really deep inside yourself, and it sort of forces you to engage with things that are difficult, or they're knotty and complex, and they may be positive or negative, but they require a lot of like thought, and kind of staying with things that are difficult. Whereas I feel like that sort of encourages you to be distant from your body, I suppose, and to
Yeah,
feel really internal. Whereas I feel like when I'm sewing, I'm forced to not think about anything except the thing I'm making, and to use, you're using your hands. If you're operating a sewing machine, you're using your feet. There's like a whole um, somatic side of that practice, which I think I don't really access otherwise in my life. I mean, I like to run, but I think generally speaking, I'm a very like reading, writing, indoors kind of person, and that can be very disembodied. So I think it's a really useful complement. What about for
Yeah, and
you?
yeah. Yeah, I think that when I started knitting, which is the first craft I did as an adult, like I was overwhelmed at first by touch, the way
Mm,
that you go into a yarn store and everything feels, and everything is, you have some things that are rough, some things that are smooth or soft, some things that are pillowy, or some things, and it was like when you go into a store and everything is decided for you, all those choices are taken away.
mm,
So I think it is really magical to be in my body, right? To have, again, that dual kind of thing, like you said, like you have the internal head part of writing, and then the physical part of making, of touching fabric or materials, and then realizing just how much choice there is. And then that led me to explore writing in a new way,
mm.
because all of a sudden things can become really prescriptive, and you're like, this is how, I need to do this, this, and this. And then you start getting into these kind of nuances of words or materials, and then everything becomes a lot more expensive.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's also a really key element of any sort of textile work that is just sensory pleasure. Like, how often do you get to do that in your everyday life? I guess if you love to cook, there might be something that, or if you love to garden, I feel like those are kind of complementary activities. But I feel like in sewing, I love to go to a fabric shop. I love to touch everything that's on offer. I love to kind of really look at the colors, consider the textures. And I just think that's like a delightful activity to spend time on. Yeah, really special.
It's, yeah, I think it's great anytime any hobby or project helps you combine senses, right? Like
Mm,
helps you, whether that's, smell with cooking, or it could be endorphins for running or whatever. And I think it's nice that because I think writing, I don't know, is different. It doesn't it just has that heady process of where
mm.
it's good, but that is also I think I'm in my head too much sometimes.
Me too.
Yeah, for sure. So, so how has sewing changed how you think about your wardrobe? You touched on it a little bit, like that it has changed it and yourself in general.
I think it has made me feel like there is a lot more possibility, and that I'm not confined to a box or specifically to. I think a lot of it's also about budget. I feel like when I started sewing, I just didn't have. I still don't have the kind of money to spend on the sort of clothes that I might adore in a shop window. But it's a lot cheaper sometimes to buy the fabric and to work out how to make it yourself. So I feel like that's been really liberating. I think also, yeah, it has made me a lot more comfortable with my body. I sort of feel like one of the great freedoms and pleasures of sewing is that your specific body becomes the center that you're working towards, rather than having to buy something that doesn't quite fit correctly and just accept that it doesn't quite fit correctly. It's sort of ludicrous that we all accept that. I mean, I guess that's sort of the way
It
the process
is.
is. Um, but yeah, I feel like it's made me feel a lot more positive about my body, because I know I can adjust something if it doesn't quite fit or it's not quite comfortable. And yeah, but I think also one of the things that's great about sewing is that your those choices you were talking about, Betsy. I think it's wonderful that you really have to think about them, because it takes so much time to make a garment from scratch, and you want to make sure that the effort you're putting in results in something that you love and that you're going to wear for years. So I think that slowing down process, and yeah, the kind of care and the care taken and the attention paid is a beautiful thing, and something I'm really really happy to have in my life. What about for you?
Yeah, and I think you also have to get over your like decision fatigue or anything. Like I was on Ravelry and looking at a bunch of knitting patterns, right? And then you're like, I want to make this cardigan. And then you're like, no, wait, I want to make this cardigan. And then it becomes overwhelming.
Mm,
And so in a way, choosing things to create, like having to make a choice, right? and to sit with that choice. If you want to sew something, you need to have something to sew. So it also helped me get more in touch with what I actually want.
Yes.
Because you see something that looks good on someone else, or maybe who doesn't look like you, like, or has a different kind of body shape or whatever. And you're like, and then you think, oh, and then so you try that, right? And it may not work. And then you're like, well, what do I like versus what people are putting in front of me that I should like. So it really forced me to get in touch with my own decision making, because a lot of times I can leave decisions up to other people and not want to be involved. So creating, because you're spending money, right, on what you're buying, on the fabric, on the notions, and time, and so it's really helped me learn how to trust myself, which is something that I never would have thought, right? And writing does that as well in a different way, because with making, you're making something and you're putting it on, and does it fit, right? Am I trusting my instincts? Because you're like, well, how many times have you made something where you're like, this pattern's wrong, like the pattern, sometimes it is, but it's usually me. And so you have to trust that it's right, trust yourself, and then keep going. And I think there's trust involved in those things. Do you think that?
I think absolutely. Yeah. I think what you were saying about trusting your taste, I think that's so true across both craft making and also writing, which I suppose are both crafts in a different way.
Yeah.
But yeah, there is nothing else except your taste when it comes down to it. You have to decide what you love and what you want to spend time on and what you want to spend money on. And that's it's just a very active position to be in. I think you're so right that often you're just presented with what's available, and you generally make a decision based on what's there. But I think sewing kind of allows you to conceive. It's not just what's available; it's what's possible, which is a slightly different question.
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And yeah, what's possible? That's good.
I wanted to ask you, Betsy, so you said that knitting was your first craft. How did you get into that, and why were you drawn to it? And also, I suppose, as someone who doesn't knit, how do you start?
Sure. So it was the year 2000-ish. I was living in New York, and I had moved to New York and didn't really know anybody. And my grand plan was that I was 25, and I was like, I want to volunteer with people who were older than me. This is how naive I was. I was like, well, what do people who are older than me do? Well, they knit, right? My grandmother knit. I was like, oh, and so I had this great plan. And then I went into a work meeting at a publishing company in New York and asked, like, does anyone know anybody who knits who can teach me? And everybody in the meeting raised their hand and knew how to knit, but none of their coworkers knew. So it was like everyone had been keeping it a secret.
Interesting.
So anyway, from there I joined a knitting circle, and then went to a knitting circle, and I was too scared at the time I was too nervous to go into the yarn shop. So my friend went in and got the needles, which is kind of embarrassing for me to admit this now. But and I learned. And then I learned that in this knitting circle, there were people that were teaching me all different ways to knit, because they would sit there, somebody would sit there and be like, this is how you knit. And then they would walk away. And then someone else would come up and be like, no, you're doing it wrong. This is what you do. And they all had different techniques and ways and tricks that I thought was really magical. And I think that if you want to start, I think that asking around can be really good, and seeing if anybody, I mean, a lot of people, I have friends that are like, teach me how to knit, and that hasn't always gone well, because they get frustrated or whatever. And then but it can be good to learn to knit from a friend versus a video or a book. It can also be a good way to get closer to people in your family that you may not know that knit. I knit with my grandmother once I learned how, and she would teach me things, and we got closer because of it, which is really nice. And then I also started the knitting circle, but just sending an email out to people, and we're like, do you want to knit, right? And some people learned that way, just because by being around, like, and it was, friends of friends that came in, and we all just met. And I was like, I don't care if you know how to knit or you do, we'll all figure it out together. And that was a nice joint way to do it. Although certainly many people have learned from YouTube and from books as well. But I would say ask around. But people in the chat may have great ideas that I have missed.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah. I do have, I'm not knitting them, but I'm making some socks right now. Oh, I don't have them in this bag. Never mind. But I have yarn because I took them out. But yeah, I'm making socks. I make socks when I'm watching TV, and and when it's hot here in the summer, it's nice.
That's lovely.
To knit socks. Oh, so there's something. Can the author read from her book? There is a suggestion in the chat.
Yeah. Do you want me to do that now?
I guess, yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, I'll read the essay that was the central one, so the first one I started with, which is about making a coat. It's called Silver Lining. Silver lining. Double-faced grey plaid and fawn wool coating. Silver viscose. Dark grey polyester thread. Silver polyester thread. Heavyweight fusible interfacing. 30mm black Corozzo button. The fabric store poppy coat. The first chill of autumn is in the air when I move in with Pawpaw. She urges me to hang my clothes in the wardrobe, but I don't want to take them out of the suitcase. On the first day, when I feel like hiding in a small dark space for hours, she makes me chicken for dinner and says, with unbearable concern, "Lele, now you will not get married," to which I say, absolutely nothing. I decide to sew something complex and labor-intensive, to keep my sadness only a shadow while my hands make something of nothing. Several months ago, I decided I would make a TFS poppy coat come winter, an oversized proper cold weather coat with a single button closure and a big soft rounded collar. It's not winter yet, but I'm cold all through and half my clothes are still at the old flat, so I start the coat. Coats are my favorite type of garment because they represent a kind of escapism. Auckland is never really cold enough for a coat, but nonetheless, wearing one in grey July makes me think of snow falling on woolen shoulders, as it does in all the cities I'd like to live in. More importantly, wearing a coat means feeling held. A coat is protection against weathers external and internal. I've never been good at sewing slowly. It's too exciting to go fast, but I don't get a choice here. I print the pattern in A0 at a local copy shop. Then, on Instagram, I look at poppy coats made by sewists around the world. Poppies cut from old woolen blankets, shearling with checked lining, lilac cashmere. I read all the captions and take notes on recurring advice. Size down 2 to 3 sizes, practice the pockets, use a point turner and press every seam. I lay out my fabric, a heavy brushed grey wool plaid, bought months ago on sale, and steam it with patience. Perhaps for once I will do it all as I should. The poppy coat is the most difficult garment I've ever made. It takes me a whole morning to learn to make welt pockets, those funny formal rectangular pockets you get on school blazers or the backs of suit trousers. I smooth my grandma's sputtery iron over many meters of interfacing, a lengthy process with pattern pieces this big. I cut my lining, a liquid silvery viscose that slithers wildly under the chalk, on the hard white tiles of the bathroom floor, the pattern weighted with library books. By the time I have sewed the shell together and it looks like a coat, with functioning pockets and half the collar, I've been sitting at the machine for 7 hours, so long I can barely straighten my neck anymore. The wool is too heavy to press the seams open properly, and the bobbin thread keeps snapping because I'm sewing 3 thick layers too quickly, and on second thought, perhaps I've snipped just a millimetre too far into the corner on one of the welt pockets, which means I'll need to patch the back before I put the lining in. But the coat is a coat, made for my body by my hands. Like gardening, sewing is an investment in the future, in what sort of person your future self will be, and how she will feel about her body, and what she will want to wear. I choose this grey plaid and cut it to my size, thinking unashamedly of how I want to feel, which is not how I feel now. More fundamentally, as writer Sophie Tannhauser puts it, sewing something for yourself implies belief in a future self. Pressing the lining today means I will stitch it into the outer shell tomorrow. Inserting a pocket now means one day it will hold my hand. I clip into the collar corners, learn and execute the finicky couture of buttonhole stitching by hand, wrestle determinedly with the petulant lining. Sewing means proving to myself I haven't given up on either work or joy. My cousin Lisa is also making a coat. We share one sewing relative, her grandmother, my great-grandmother, who died when we were small. But both of us remember her knotted hands, which cooked chow fan for 60 years and tended the garden and made the whole family's winter coats. Lisa is making a paper-cut patterns Nova coat of 2 contrasting black and brown tweeds. Her coat is minimalistic, a clean cocoon shape, while mine is sweeping and romantic. She reminds me that another sensibility entirely is possible. We sew our coats together, and on the days we are apart, we send each other progress pictures. Us in half coats, in single sleeves, threads bird nested at hems, everything unfinished and promising. It is just what I want. Lisa finishes her coat before me and sends me a picture taken in front of her bathroom mirror. She looks fantastic. It remains amazing to me that this silly little hobby of ours could turn out something that looks like an actual coat. When I next see her, she's wearing her coat out in the world, an idea made real. It looks as good as anything you could buy, but she shows me how, at the hem, where the lining meets the shell, there's a slight misalignment, a reminder it was made by an expert hand. I think this is quite beautiful in her coat, but when I attach the lining of my own coat to the shell and it's similarly crooked, I feel annoyed. I hate this feeling, and this month I'm tired of my feelings, and after unpicking the seam twice, I end up letting it be. I move on to the next step, so eventually I can send Lisa a photo taken in front of Pawpaw's bathroom mirror. I don't know what to make of this slip of time. I rise each morning at 6. I read before work. I make small, simple meals. The rice cooker lisps beside the stove. The orchids pose stark and flowerless in the living room. The washing machine plays an irresistible electronica version of Die Forelle to announce the end of a cycle. I enjoy my enjoyable job. I save money. I have not one single drink, and in many ways I feel good. On the other hand, I still wake too early every single day in the middle of a panicked half-dream in which I am looking and looking, inside my suitcase, beneath the bed, in the drawer in the old apartment where I kept old keys and shopping bags, for something I've lost and cannot have back. The day I finished the coat, I've been living with Pawpaw for a month. She grew up in an era when you sewed not for pleasure, but because you couldn't afford to buy clothes, and so she's amused by the coat saga. Every afternoon, she calls one of her many friends for a gossip about what so-and-so paid for her house, which family member has caught COVID now, and me. She still hasn't realized I can understand almost everything she says in Cantonese. I hear her telling everyone she knows that for some reason I'm making a coat and that she'd like me to stay. Thank you.
Thank you. And somebody wants to see the cover. So I have it right here. It looks like this.
Betsy.
Yes. It's wonderful. Yes. Oh, my clapping hands. So there's so much feeling in this book. There's so much about heart and love and and getting to know you and your grandmother, in different ways, right? And seeing different, your cousin, and seeing all these different connections. And you note that there's the freedom of the act of sewing itself. And I wrote that question, and then I think, I guess I'm curious about your answer about that. And then is there freedom in the act of writing too?
I think I'm a better writer than I am a sewer. Definitely it feels like there's more freedom in writing because I've been doing it for longer, I suppose. But I do think both of them are acts of great freedom. I guess the thing that's really freeing about sewing is that the sky's the limit. It's about imagining what you want and then bringing it into being. And I think the possibility of making something from nothing is like it's actually magic. It's just sort of amazing that that's even possible in a human life. So I really value that about it. I guess in terms of the feeling, I don't think it's true that people can be split into two categories, but I do think, broadly speaking, there are people who like to look at their feelings really face on, and then there are people who like to withdraw from them. I think it's about which option makes you feel safest, or which one you're most drawn to. And I think definitely I'm a big feeler in all of my writing and also in my living. I like to look at things head on. I want to get to the bottom of things. I want to figure out what they mean. I want to try and figure out how to, I don't know, like what it means to be a person. This is such a big abstract question. I don't know. So I think sewing has been a way of doing that for me. It just touches all these different things in my life and questions I've always had. And so it's always been, it's been a way of figuring those things out. And I think writing is also that for me. Yeah. Do you think it's similar for you, Betsy?
Yeah, I mean, there have been periods of in my life where I've written and where I haven't written, where I've made and where I haven't made, and where I've done both. And often you'll see people say that sewing or making is like therapy, and so is writing. And I think that I can tell, like, when I am having a hard time, I pull back from those things, from writing, exactly when I should dive in, because everything just feels like a muddle. And so, but when I think of the times that I've written the most, I mean, there are a lot of angsty journals, right, that I threw away that were, that I wrote when I was like 14. That was,
We've all been there.
pretty painful. I actually came across them in my high school poems that were in the literary journal, and that was also pretty bad. But that's where you begin, right? And I think that, but yeah, there's freedom in both things. And I think that if more people got into writing or making or whatever it is that they see the lens through of the whole world through, then we'd be in a much better place. For sure. So have you written anything about making or sewing or creativity, like in companion with your writing since you wrote the book?
Have I? I don't think I have, which is kind of odd actually, now you mention it. I think I've done a lot of sewing since I wrote the book. I feel like basically all of the garments that I've written about in the book are things that some of them I still have and still wear, but lots of them I've given away or I've cut up and made something else from the fabric, which I suppose is in some ways exactly the ethos that I'm trying to espouse. But it's a bit funny, it's a bit odd. And someone the other day asked me if I could send them a photo of one of the garments in the book, and I thought, I don't have that anymore. I don't know who I've given it to. I can't remember where it was sort of this awful, awful realization. But yeah, I think I've done a lot of sewing, and I've done a lot of writing, but they haven't overlapped in quite the same way. But maybe in the future.
Yeah. What are you writing now?
Well, what am I writing now? I'm trying to write a novel, but I think this is the kind of thing where it may all terribly not work out. So you should ask me in 6 months' time if I'm still going with it. But
is it your first novel, or have you written? Okay.
Yeah. I've not really written any I've sort of dabbled in short fiction, but I haven't really written any long form fiction before. So that's been quite interesting. And I think also because I've mostly written creative nonfiction up to this point, it feels as if one of the wonderful things about writing nonfiction is that you don't have to make it up. So you don't have to figure out all the
Yeah,
details. You can
true.
just select what is relevant, what adds to the story, what shape it makes. But I'm feeling it's very freeing and also quite scary to have to make everything up. So it's been very interesting.
Do you have like a big like whiteboard or something where you have like, you know, characters and everything mapped out like you see sometimes people have, or post-it notes on the wall? Or
No, not nearly that organized. I do have a big notebook that I scribble
that's
down
great.
various ideas, but yeah. It's
I'm sure it's going to be fantastic.
very kind.
So you're
Are you working on any craft projects at the moment?
outside of the socks, which I don't have with me. I just looked up a cardigan called the rosemary cardigan to make, and
What does it look like?
it has like a shawl collar,
Okay.
button-up cardigan. I mean, I don't know, it's the shawl collar for me really that does it.
That's so cool.
So I and then but sewing wise, I have a top whose name I have a tank top that I was going to make, and then the peppermint wide leg pants, which you wrote about
Oh,
in the
yes.
book,
Yeah.
is
That's
also
a great
something
one.
that I would like to make. But you scared me with the corduroy. I was going to make them in corduroy, and corduroy seems like it's horrible to sew with.
It's not horrible to sew with, but you will want to vacuum afterwards.
Yeah, and get that little teeny tiny sewing machine brush.
Yeah. Quite fun to use that one.
Yeah, but I have not read about about you talking about those pants, so, and all the various things that I need,
Oh,
all
I
the
wish you luck. It
notions.
sounds like a great list of craft projects. Yeah.
Yeah, what about you?
Well, we're just coming into summer on this side of the world, so I'm about to start actually two projects. I feel like first of all, I want to make a sundress because I don't have one that fits me anymore that I like, so that would
Right.
be fun. And then I've got really into riding my bike in Melbourne, so I think I need to make a bunch of like summery shorts. I usually I wear sundresses, so this is a completely new field of expertise for me. But I think
Shorts.
this is my summer of shorts.
That's
Yeah.
exciting. I had
Yeah.
a summer of skirts,
Uh-huh.
so where I was like, I'm just determined to figure out a simple pattern that is a simple skirt that I can make really
Yeah.
quickly. But
Yes. Yeah. That you like and feel comfortable in. Yeah,
yeah, it'll take some experimenting for
for
sure.
sure.
Oh, but because we are now getting into cooler weather here,
Of
which
course, yeah.
yeah. So I guess I know the Q&A is in a couple minutes, but so you mentioned bravery a lot in the book about
Yeah.
how embroidering the names of your female ancestors and lining lended to bravery, and in a message to in a robe made for your friend saying that they're brave. So how does making or writing or both connect you to bravery?
Um, I think I tend to be a very doubt-filled person, and so I'm often talking myself into being more courageous than I really am, if that makes sense. But I think also I wrote this book during a very tumultuous time. I feel like personally it was very tumultuous. I was moving around. I went through this breakup. Everything changed very quickly in my life within this sort of span of a year. But it was also a time, COVID had happened. I think people generally had been through a very rough period. And I think in those times, having something to hold on to is really valuable and can make you feel quite a bit braver. So I feel like for me, often that is making. I think the act of sewing something, first of all, it's tangible.
Yeah.
And secondly, there's a sense of control and of progress that I think goes with that, which otherwise can be quite hard to find when things feel unsteady outside in your life. So yeah, I think sewing can be a way of having something to hold on to when things feel unsteady, and that's an incredibly valuable and important tool to have in your arsenal.
Yeah, you move a lot in the book. There's a lot of
Yeah,
moving.
a lot of moving. Yeah. Hopefully that's over now.
Yeah. How long have you been in your current place? Have you been there a while?
Well, I moved to Melbourne in January, so it hasn't been that
Okay.
long, but I really like it here, so hopefully I won't be moving again.
Oh,
Yeah.
good.
I see that
What's
Brandon
Brett?
has
Yeah.
back up.
Well, I didn't want to cut you off, but amazing to have such a great conversation. And I know the people who are listening are definitely having just as much fun as I am. This is just a small reminder to the people in the chat. If you do have questions for Maddie or Betsy, make sure to put them in the chat so I can bring them up. I'm going to go ahead and share one of my own personal questions before diving in the chat, just to give people a little extra time. So something that I was really interested when I was listening to this was the way, Maddie, you were talking about braiding the kind of like larger questions with the personal. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more like on the writing side about when you decided to make those moves between some of the more interior and the practical things. Were there books or were there lessons from your years sewing that kind of gave you an intuition into this? It's just that braided narrative is always so interesting to me.
That's a lovely question, Brandon. I think my general impression is that whenever something personal happens to you, it's always connected to some wider social strain. I mean, I do think everything is political to some extent, and I do think there is a sense that the particular reflects the general, and they are connected. And so when I was writing about specific things I'd sewed, I noticed that they were always connected to broader trends that I was observing. And I think when I noticed one of those threads, no pun intended, when I noticed one of those threads, I tried to pull on it and to kind of draw in the wider themes that I saw. So I don't know, an example of this, what would an example be? I think I talk a little bit in the book about trying to sew a pair of trousers that have a zip fly. So they're called hard pants in the sewing world. And they're notoriously difficult to fit because you sort of, there's so many parts of when you're fitting a pair of trousers, there are so many parts that have to fit you correctly. And if you want them to be a fitted pair of pants, are they going to be high or low waisted? Are you going to have wide leg or narrow leg? Will they be tight the whole way down? Will there be parts of the leg where they're relaxed? Will you use elastic at any point? All of these questions require sort of minute decisions to be made and also lots of adjustments. And I noticed that when I was making those trousers, I wasn't really just talking about making a pair of trousers for myself. I was talking about the whole process of fitting and the whole process of having a body and the kind of the ways that when you buy a pair of trousers with a zip fly off the rack, often they don't fit you well and you just sort of have to accept that. And so it seemed like a moment to open that conversation up a bit wider and not just be talking about making myself a pair of trousers, as fascinating as that might have been. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely know what you mean. You can't tell, but I'm really tall. And so finding pants that fit me is
Yes,
literally the bane of my existence.
I totally understand.
And so that idea of like, relating it to something that's small really speaks to me a lot. There's another question in the chat from Colleen asking Maddie, could you talk a little bit more about how you ordered the 17 garments in Patchwork? Was there any kind of
Yeah.
logic that you were using to put them together? Or maybe the 16 before the 17th was asked of you.
Um, I mean, they are roughly chronological. So I start with the first garment I ever made, and I kind of move through becoming a more confident sewer. But I guess I also wanted to be sort of a narrative arc. And because the first essay that I'd written was the one about the coat, that was I suppose, a really pivotal experience in my life. And so I felt like it was a sort of a hinge point during the narrative. And so I wanted there to be garments that led up to that and then garments that led away, and for there to be a gesture at the end um, of opening. I mean, like in some ways I feel like it's the classic breakup story of like, you have this difficult emotional experience, and then at the other end you've really learned something quite large about yourself, and things have opened up and changed in ways you couldn't have expected. So I suppose I wanted the text overall to make that gesture. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm hoping people aren't shy. So again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I'm also going to throw it to Betsy. If you have anything else that you wanted to ask in this time, please go ahead. We still have plenty of time.
Yeah, sure. I can ask. So Maddie, I think you were in grad school, right? When you wrote some of these pieces, and then some of them were published as well. So did the original idea that you have end up becoming the book at the end, or did it shift along the way, as a lot of projects can and do?
It totally shifted. When I wrote the essay about the coat, I thought that was like a one-off essay. Sometimes I write things from my Substack, and they're all quite different, and they're just sort of things that occur to me at the time. But I saw that the Emma Press, which was the UK press that I originally published with, they had put out a call for book proposals. And so sort of having this coat essay, I was like, maybe I could write a book proposal that's about sewing.
Yeah.
Like I hadn't really thought it through. I put together like a sort of a scrappy 10-page project with a chapter outline that I just made up. Like I'd not written any of those essays or thought about what the garments would be. And I sent it off to them, and then like 9 or 10 months passed and I didn't hear back. And so I sort of assumed that was the end of it. And at a certain point, they did reply and they were like, we really like your proposal. Could you send us the whole manuscript? And I thought, I haven't written the book. I haven't written it. I don't have anything. And so at that stage, I guess like I thought a bit more about how I would flesh it out and what the shape would be. And yeah, it kind of grew from there. So I suppose the ideas were all percolating in the background, but I hadn't really conceived of it as a book about sewing. Yeah.
Funny how that happens. And now you have a book about sewing.
Yeah. Do you feel like you had both of your books, Betsy, were they things that you've been thinking about for a long time, or did they kind of come to you?
Yeah, they were. And I think the Knitting for Good, I was writing a blog and an editor contacted me, and we kind of shaped it together. Whereas with Craftivism, I was introduced to somebody at Arsenal Pulp through my friend Leanne Prain, who's an author there. She's written a bunch of books for them that are all textile-y, and one's about creativity, and they're all very good. And so for that, I came with an idea in place, and became a book. So
that's wonderful.
Which was nice. So yeah, they were both different.
We do have a small follow-up, if you're willing to talk a bit more about the narrative arc that you're describing that you were trying to trace along, Maddie.
Oh, what else can I say about that? I suppose, okay, so it's sort of an outline. The book starts with my partner at the time and I leaving London. We've been living there for a few years. We've been living in the UK for a few years, and we came back to New Zealand during COVID. And initially we lived in New Plymouth, which is like a sort of a smaller town on the West Coast. And then we lived in Auckland. And so the beginning of the book is about coming home and the sort of receding into what you had known before, and then sort of discovering that it's not quite as you remember, or it's not quite as lovely as you remember, and kind of coming to terms with, I guess, personal disillusionment, but also the disillusionment on a mass scale of people during COVID. Your life not going as you planned, having to adjust, and having to rethink what the shape of things is. And then I suppose the second half of the book is about moving from Auckland to Wellington, which is another town in New Zealand, another city in New Zealand. And that being like, I suppose, I mean, I do love Auckland because I'm from Auckland, but it's also, I have a complicated relationship because I'm from it as well. And I think going to Wellington really felt like an opening up, and I was sort of able to be still in my home country, but somewhere new, having new experiences, meeting new people. So I suppose the gesture, like the narrative arc of the book is really about coming home and then leaving again, and the different challenges of those two experiences, and also the different kind of beauties of them both. And yeah, I think I mean, I think change is very difficult, but I also think change is like the soul of life. You can't stay in one place forever. You can't keep doing the same thing forever. And so it's really about learning to accept that, I suppose.
And I love that, especially against when you're thinking so much about like your ability to have an agency when it comes to clothes and the history that they hold. Like that in itself is a kind of change that requires you to actively participate in. So again, for me, I love to hear those things.
Thanks, Brandon. It's very kind.
I always like to give a little bit of a last thing in case somebody has, a written question and they're just waiting to press that enter in our last few moments together. But if not, let's go ahead and make sure that we are giving great thanks to these two amazing writers who gave time, and also great thanks to all of you for coming to hear us. And again, please use the link in the chat to grab a copy of Patchwork, a Sewist diary, an amazing memoir that I'm sure that you will all enjoy. And I want to thank you all for logging on tonight.
Thank you. And thank you, Maddie, for sharing about your lovely book.
Thank you so much, Betsy.
And
Nice to chat.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.